Welcome once again to St. Louis. There's so much going on. It's the official start of the summer season across the country with Memorial Day starting last week. And of course, that means summer is right around the corner. But with this health emergency we have going on, there's no telling what summer is going to look like in St. Louis. Joining me now is President of the Board of Aldermen, President Lewis Reed. President Reed, good to see you.
Nice seeing you too, George, and thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. I know it's been a busy time for you as well and everyone in city government right now. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of things, how are you personally doing?
Well, I'm personally doing well. My wife and kids, we've been, adhering to the stay-at-home order. And also just, working within the community at the same time and doing it in a safe way, volunteering to make sandwiches and give out meals to people, and also working to get people who may not have transportation to testing, trying to figure out ways that they can still get tested. So all of those things, and being there for all of the workers that are on the front line, from our healthcare workers to our janitorial staff, the folks in the grocery stores and the like. So it's been busy all at the same time, right? But we're holding up well.
That's good to hear, and it's good to see that you're happy and healthy and everyone there is. One of the complicated things, particularly with St. Louis and St. Louis County, is you have the rest of the state of Missouri, which is opening up. Right? They're ready to open up. You have to go as far as Kansas City to kind of see another cluster where they're trying to slow things down. Does this make your job more complicated in terms of legislating and figuring out the resources you need in St. Louis?
I think it makes not just my job in St. Louis, but people all across this country, it makes their job more difficult, right? When you look at the funds, right, that are going out, that coming from the federal government and going to the metropolitan areas across this country, right? We are a city of under 500,000. So the St. Louis city itself, we did not get any funding from that first round of funding. St. Louis County ended up with 174 million, right? But that we need the funding if we're going to have the contact tracers in place, and we're going to be able to do the things that have to be done to assure that when we open up, that we can do it in a responsible manner and keep the population of the city safe. And that takes resources, and resources that we do not have. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 to $60 million gap in our budget now. And our budget projections through the end of the year, we have to assume certain markets aren't going to come back right away also. So, but other cities across the country are facing the same thing. Ours is a little more challenging because we did not get any part of that first round of funding into the city of St. Louis proper.
Of course, I managed to watch one of your most recent council meetings, and one of the concerns there was in terms of trying to generate funds, you don't want to raise taxes on people, particularly property taxes, what have you. That's a little distasteful in the situation that's going on across the board where people are out of work and what have you, and trying to find these ways to put in stopgaps and keep the budget going. Tell me a little bit about these discussions you've been having recently.
Yeah, some of the discussions we're having, because we, prior to going out of session, around the first of the year, we were working on some measures for preschool and early childhood education. So we have to continue to work on those measures, but at the same time, some of those things that will go forth and be on the ballot for people to vote on, right? With the coronavirus in the wings and so many pressures on each and every family in our city, it's up in the air as to which way they would vote on some of these measures now, right? So it's going to impact what's happening at the ballot box also because of what's happening immediately right now within their homes, right? So we thought it would be best to have a property tax, because then through the property tax, it's not a sales tax. And we're hoping that the voters will go along with it because, post-coronavirus, we still have the issue of early childhood education and proper funding for it, that we want to be able to meet those measures.
And early childhood education is one of those things which, across the board, it's universally known that these are one of the things you have to really pay attention to, particularly if you're going to stem the tide of violence that goes on with our young people as they get into the older grades and what have you. Tell me a little bit about the situation with violence in St. Louis and where you're at with that.
Well, as you know, we are working to put in place Cure Violence, right? Because we've seen a record number of young people shot and killed in our city. Last year was just horrendous, right? And then this year, even with the coronavirus, our numbers in terms of gun violence and gun violence in the young population and deaths because of the gun violence, every one of those numbers are exceeding last year's numbers, even with the coronavirus. So we have two healthcare crises that we need to address all at once. We have the coronavirus that we have to address, but we also have this gun violence issue that we have to address, all on the same track. So we put in funding last year to put in place Cure Violence throughout our city, especially in those areas of highest need. And we're really pushing to get those programs in place, up and running in our city. But coronavirus has made that even more of a challenge, just because of getting some of the nonprofits that we have hired to get them to begin the hiring process and interviewing people and getting them up and started, right? So all of those things are. The coronavirus has made everything more difficult. The other thing that has made it more difficult for us to get Cure Violence in place is that we lost nearly 6 months on the front end when it should have been moving, and RFPs should have went out, and a lot of decisions should have been made where those things weren't done. So that 6 months right now that we lost on the front end, we're feeling it really heavily on the back end because coronavirus has come into play.
Absolutely. And, we'll see how this all plays out. But one of the things our nonprofit organizations out here, they depend on facilities and divergent programs to get young people involved in other things, getting them off the streets. But with social distancing and what's going on with this coronavirus, that's just not feasible. I just wonder what kind of strategies we can implement and put together to try and put a cork in this.
No, and you're right. I think that, well, first thing is St. Louis City. St. Louis City and St. Louis County, we need to operate on a regional basis. It's an issue that you don't have there in Chicago because, your county encompasses a lot of the surrounding area, a large enough area that by implementing stuff, you can implement it on a more of a regional basis because of the just sheer mass of Chicago, right? You look at the city of St. Louis, we have our own county, and so we're this little roughly 64.7 square miles, right? So St. Louis County, which is directly outside of St. Louis City, the population there is roughly 1 million people. You have 345,000 in the city of St. Louis. So it's so important for us to address this coronavirus issue on a regional basis. And that's one thing that we have not done yet, but that's a message that I'm pushing heavily, because if St. Louis County, which is just a stone's throw away from where I'm standing right now, if St. Louis County is implementing one program and St. Louis City is implementing a totally different program, and we're not sharing in resources, and we're not doing this in a unified manner, it may be a much longer time before we see ourselves get past coronavirus.
Let's turn the clock back a little bit. Your first years in government there in the 6th Ward. Paint a picture of me of what was going on and why you decided to jump into this game.
Yeah, the 6th Ward is a ward that sits in the central corridor of the city, right? It encompassed, half of downtown, the Loft District and things of that nature, and then parts of the historic Lafayette Square area and things of that nature, right? But it was really lacking in development and growth, right? We wanted to have lofts along Washington Avenue. That was just a dream, and the city of St. Louis was like, what if we can have these lofts and have loft dwellers downtown on Washington Avenue. Lafayette Square was struggling, but now it is one of the most. It has been ranked as one of the most beautifully restored places in the country, and we now have loft dwellers all through downtown. So that first 8 years as alderman of the 6th ward, I was able to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.7 billion dollars in new development going within that ward to address the infrastructure issues, and also bring forth some programs to help struggling families.
And since then, you've implemented a great number of great programs and policies to really help and improve the city across the board. And things like, whether it's dog parks or bike lanes, these kind of things that make it a walkable city, that bring communities together. Talking about the importance of that in your philosophy of governance.
Well, I look at, the reason I started Bike St. Louis was because of this idea of the perception of crime, right? And people getting a good feeling about the spaces that they live and operate in, and begin feeling comfortable commuting, right? Because I've spent a significant amount of time working on environmental issues and sustainability issues since I've been in office, because I think that helps both ways. If we can deliver energy and power and the basic resources at a much cheaper rate to some of our struggling communities, we can help. Everybody is lifted up because of that, right? So Bike St. Louis wasn't just about just an individual going out and bicycling. It was about a community. It was about a transformation, and it was about showing St. Louis in a different light, a city that's on the move, and a city that is welcoming to a lot of the young folks, because you need that younger generation here in the city of St. Louis. Like, for example, Nextdoor, I put Nextdoor in place so that people in the neighborhoods can begin to communicate with their neighbors. Because, as you know, in the fast-paced world we live in, we don't really communicate with our neighbors like they used to do years ago, right? So Nextdoor is a platform that is a social network that's set up by neighborhoods, right? So now we have it in neighborhoods all across the city. We have tens of thousands of people connected to it, and they share in ideas. They do crime fighting. They work together to notify their neighbors of various different issues, and they communicate with city government with it also.
One of the things that the shelter-in-place order has really exacerbated is the existing issue with domestic violence and family issues. Now that everyone's cooped in the house together, the police are responding to more and more domestic situations. What are some of the things how can we help people to get through this time? What do you think needs to happen in these areas?
Well, I think that a couple things. That also leads into this idea of contact tracing, right? Because I think it's so important that we keep in contact with people all throughout our community, right? And in those households, especially those households that have experienced domestic violence in the past, right? I think it's so important that we reach out to them, and that our police departments have all the information and also all the PPEs, so that they feel comfortable engaging with the families, right? I think it's important that we invest in our counselors, so that our counselors can continue to reach out to these families and assure these families that there is some support, and also help them to mitigate issues that are happening within the household.
There's a debate region by region across the country as people are starting to talk about the contact tracing. There's debates going on as to people's personal rights, whether it violates HIPAA laws to divulge or to have a database of people's health situations available to public servants. I'm wondering if that's a debate that you all have been having in your council as well.
We have not had that debate yet, but I'm sure that we will very soon. You remember, we just came back in session 3 or 4 weeks ago, so we're right at the beginning of our new session. So what I would imagine that we will have that debate. And it is a fine balance between violating a person's rights and also assuring that they are safe and that the community at large is safe, right? We now see people across the country, they will go into a store or whatever without a mask and yell and get in other people's faces and say, hey, I have the right, right? This is my right, and you're not going to violate my right by saying I cannot come into this store and shop without a mask. So that's a debate that I don't think we will see the end of anytime soon. But when you think about it, you know, at least my philosophy is, okay, when does your rights and mine begin, right? One of those things is your rights end when you could bring me some personal harm or my family some personal harm, right? So if you have coronavirus, you do not have the right to come and spit on me or to come and yell in my face within the 6 feet, because you know it's like going in a theater and yelling fire, right? Because then you're going to bring harm to some of the other people inside. So it's a tough. It's a tough discussion, and it's one that I don't think we'll see the end of anytime soon. You know, the president of the United States certainly isn't making it easy to get through some of these discussions. So we'll see where it goes.
For sure. And of course, you know, small businesses, restaurant owners, they're the heartbeat of communities and neighborhoods across the region, and they're really, really getting hammered. What's going on with the businesses in the area?
It's same. We're seeing very similar things in the city of St. Louis that we're seeing across the country, where small business owners, they're looking for some guidance from the city. They're saying, okay, if we open, we know we're going to do the 6 feet, you know, we're going to do the 6 feet distancing and stuff. But if someone wants to come into our restaurant or store without a mask and we call the police department, what is the police department going to do, right? What is your response going to be from the city, right? And because if we let them in and someone ends up infected, within that customer base that's within the boundaries of our business, what is our liability and what's the city's liability? I mean, how does all that work, right? So, and then also, you know, for the time that we were closed, while we're waiting for our business to rebound, what kind of resources are available from the city, and what can you all do to help us beyond the small business loan and beyond some of these other programs? What can the city specifically do? So some of the things that we're doing, we have like a rental assistance program so that their employees and people who are having problems paying rent, they can go into our rental assistance program. We have that. We have a mortgage assistance program that we're putting more money into, right? And you know, a bunch of programs like that to help the families directly that are being impacted by it, which should relieve some of the pressure on the small businesses whose employees have been, you know, drastically hurt because of it.
One of the other things that you've really made an important factor is transparency in government and everything you're doing. You guys put your meetings online, and everything seems to be working well, with the exception of, I'm not going to name any names, but a couple of your alders look like they're broadcasting from a bunker somewhere. But,
yeah. I see that. We're trying to fix that. We're working on fixing that. I don't know that we. Yeah, we're working on fixing that.
I'm not going to bust anybody out. If you log in, you'll see what I'm talking about. But no, it's good. And it's very important for people to stay abreast of how these discussions are going, how policy works in the city, how they can get involved. If you could reiterate to people how important it is to keep track and to pay attention to what goes on in government.
It is absolutely essential that people keep track of what's happening within their government. You know, George, before I got involved in government, I was a small business owner, right? So, you know, I looked at the government and said, well, okay, as long as my streets are clean, as long as some of these basic services are being done, that's all I really need, right? But when you get involved, you find out that there's so much more. And you also find out the power that you have to change what's happening in your government. For example, you look at some of the programs that I worked on, like Cure Violence. I fought to get funded in place for Cure Violence for 5 years. We were able to finally get it in place when members of the public stood up and said, guess what? Enough's enough. And a bunch of mothers got together and said, you know what? I've had to bury one of my young kids, and I don't want to bury any more of my kids, right? Mothers for fair gun laws, right? All of these organizations, and then Moms Demand Action, and then there's another nonprofit that works to get gun locks for families, right? So that they understand what gun safety is. So a ton of different organizations like that came together. They were led by Moms Demand Action. And when that happened, it transformed everything. It transformed the discussion, and we were able to get it in place. That's the power you have as just a regular resident, right? Whether you live in a city or not. So folks in Chicago. But the first part is understanding what government is doing, which is why we put everything online and we open it up, and we open up our government so that we want people to be able to easily get the information, to understand what we're doing as legislators, and to weigh in.
Of course, the most important factor in that is, of course, sound leadership. How is the relationship going between the executive, the mayor's office, and the board of aldermen?
Well, as you know, if you've watched any of our meetings, tensions are rising. One of the things that is going to cause a lot of heavy discussion in the coming weeks is this idea of the number of contact tracers. The city of St. Louis is a city of over 300,000 people, and the mayor's health director, it only has 10 to 13 contact tracers, right? But the National Association for County and City Health Officials have said you should have anywhere between around 30 per 100,000 people. That's how many you should have. So that means the city of St. Louis, we should have about 90, right? And when you look at the number of positive cases in the city, right, we have somewhere in there 1,744 positive cases. And of the 1,744 positive cases, we're only tracking 55 people, right? So, I mean, just noodle that for a minute. So the CDC says that the people that should be monitored, right? If you came in contact with a person within 6 feet of a person for 15 minutes, right? Who was found to be positive 2 days later, you should be monitored, right? So when you have 1,744 cases, certainly those 1,744 people came in contact with more than 55 people. So when you look at that and you say, okay, what does that mean? That means that there are people that have come in contact with these 1,744 people that aren't on our radar, that aren't being tracked by us as a city. And they're not getting the proper information to keep themselves safe, their family members safe, and others safe, right? So that's going to be a major debate at the Board of Aldermen, especially when you look at the impact on the minority community, right? So of the 1,744 cases, 1,131 of them are positive cases are African American. Of the 109 people who have died from coronavirus in the city, 71 of them are African American. So when you look at those staggering numbers and staggering differences, right, it becomes so important to target our resources and certainly to assure that the people who are infected or who may be infected, they know, and that we're tracking and working with them, right? And so the members of the board have been looking at those numbers. 1,744 cases, only 55 being monitored.
That's yeah, that gives you pause there because we don't know where these people are going and what they're doing, which is one of those things when you have the weather warming up and now people are more like, oh, well, Grandpa Joe wants to have a barbecue, so a couple of us can go over there. Well, I don't know where Grandpa Joe's been last week. He still has a job. I don't know where his neighbors. I'm like, I love everybody, but
Yeah.
we have to really just really be careful right now.
Yeah, we have to wake up, and it's like when the reason we need regionalism here in the city of St. Louis, a regional approach to coronavirus. Coronavirus started overseas. Now it's all around the globe, so certainly it's not going to have a problem crossing the city-county border. So the city and the county needs to understand that, right? That just because you and the county have the funds and the city doesn't have the funds because of the way the original bill came out, does not mean that it's not in the best interest of the county itself to also assure that the city has the resources they need, right? These young folks that are out there, they need to understand when you touch somebody, you're coming in contact with everybody else that they touched, everybody else that they've been in contact with that day, right? And everybody that they've been in contact with two or three steps down the road, right? So, and they can bring that back and put one of their family members, their grandparents, their mother and father, their brother and sisters in a deadly situation. And it's real.
It is real, and that's why we want to talk to you because you're the real deal, President Louis Reed, President of the Board of Aldermen for the City of St. Louis. Thank you so much for taking time today. I hope you enjoy yourself as the weather gets warmer out there. It's good to see you happy and healthy, and hopefully as we move further into summer, we can talk more about what's going on there and particularly what we're doing for our young people out there.
All right, thanks, George. Have a good day. Stay safe. If you drive past Joliet, swing by, say hey to some of my cousins.
Last time I was in Joliet, I was visiting a prison.
Oh, yeah. It's 6 feet away, though.
Right. Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next week right here on Now That's St. Louis.